Welcome and thank you for standing by. All participants will remain in a listen-only mode for the duration of today's webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and may be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I would now like to turn the session over to your host from the U.S. Census Bureau, the Chief Scientist and Associate Director for Research and Methodology, Sally Ann Keller. Sally, you may begin.
Thank you, Anthony, and hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're coming in from. I want to welcome you to this installment of the U.S. Census Bureau's Disclosure Avoidance webinar series. I'm really excited to be here with my colleagues, Cass Dorius, Michael Haas, Luke Rogers. We also have Shelley Hedrick, who's been helping us with a lot of our webinars and communication, and also James Whitehorn, who is our expert in redistricting. And so they're all with us today to help answer questions and to help support this webinar. Today's webinar, we want to share with you some really exciting plans that we have on our research program for disclosure avoidance applications to the 2030 census dissemination and products. Now, disclosure avoidance are the methods that we use to safeguard our data that we collect, and that's your data on you, individuals, and we want to protect the confidentiality of your responses, yet still provide really valuable aggregate statistics and that can be informative on the country's people, places, and economy, as well as information that you can trust that we will keep safe. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Cass in just a second, but first I want to share just a few housekeeping items. The first is that if you have questions, please use the Q&A application. In that you'll find down, it should be down at the bottom right corner of the panel, of the webinar panel. That's how you can actually provide and send in your questions. And I'll be monitoring the questions and be calling on my colleagues to help answer the questions. Some of those questions might get answered during the course of the webinar itself, just with a typed in answer. And be aware that if you post a question and we provide an answer to that question through typing in what the answer might be, that will be posted publicly to everyone. So please use that feature so that we can adequately capture the questions and hopefully provide thoughtful answers for you. Today's webinar, as Anthony noted, will be recorded and it will be posted probably later this week for others to review that weren't able to attend, or if you have parts of it that you want to re-review, you'll be able to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cass to kick us off and help everyone understand where our research program is going and how we hope to safeguard the information you entrust with us.
Thank you, Sally, and good afternoon, everyone. As Sally mentioned, the Census Bureau uses a variety of methods to ensure that the statistics and the statistical products that we publish don't inadvertently reveal confidential information about our respondents. And these statistical techniques, known as disclosure avoidance methods, they help us to meet our legal obligations to protect our respondent confidentiality, and they're also essential to reassure respondents that the information they entrust us with won't be used against them. So when we're thinking about these safeguards that are so important to us, it's important to understand that there are many different disclosure avoidance methods, and new techniques and approaches are being developed all the time. But because many of these methods protect against disclosure in very different ways, it's often difficult to compare and contrast them on an even footing. So recently, the Census Bureau began looking ahead at some of the disclosure avoidance decisions we're going to have to make over the next few years. And we realized that we needed a scientifically principled way to look at the strengths and weaknesses of these very different disclosure avoidance options in order to properly evaluate them. To that end, we established a Census Bureau-wide team to develop a framework of principles that we as an agency could use to guide our evaluations of different disclosure avoidance options. In putting our disclosure avoidance futures working group together, We understood that these principles shouldn't be limited to a specific census or survey, but rather we really were looking for a universal set of principles that we could use across the agency to inform disclosure avoidance decisions across our statistical products. And so to that end, we brought people into our working group who had a wide variety of experiences. They represented the breadth of our information collections and our statistical activities. And they also had subject matter expertise across our economic, demographic, decennial communications, and research and methodology directorates. And so this is the group that worked together to pull the information that you're going to see throughout this webinar today. And this effort culminated in a consensus framework of disclosure avoidance principles that the entire team could stand behind. So we shared this framework and principles at the Census Bureau and across multiple forums, and then we received your feedback. And through that process, we were able to revise our framework and then publish it in the Harvard Data Science Review, which you are welcome to go and read more about there. In the interest of time today, we're only going to discuss a few of the high-level details of the framework so that we have plenty of time to talk about how we're charting our path ahead to the 2030 census and the disclosure avoidance system that we'll use. But if you're interested in learning more about the background and motivations for these principles, as well as a detailed discussion and walkthrough of each of the precepts, please go and watch our January webinar, which is available on the Census Bureau website and the URL shown here. But let's get to the heart of the matter. This is one of my favorite pieces that came out of all of these discussions because it is this simple yet very complex idea. At the heart of disclosure avoidance, we're faced with a set of constraints that we call the triple trade-off of official statistics. So every statistic that you publish that is derived from a confidential data source is going to reveal or leak a tiny bit of confidential information. As a result, the more statistics that you publish and the greater granularity or accuracy of those statistics, the greater the resulting risk of disclosure. So conversely, every statistical technique that you can use to protect confidentiality is going to degrade the resulting statistics in some manner, either by decreasing its availability and granularity or by decreasing the accuracy. And this isn't a bug of the disclosure avoidance system, it's how those methods protect confidentiality. So here we are. There is an inherent trade-off for every statistical agency in the world, including ours, to navigate between the degree of data protection and the resulting availability and accuracy of the statistics to be released. At the Census Bureau, these difficult decisions are made by the Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, or DSEP, who wrestle with questions like, how much disclosure risk is too much? Or how accurate do these statistics need to be to meet their intended uses? And these are very difficult decisions, but they're not made in a vacuum. You can see in the center of this graphic of the triple trade-off that scientific integrity and stakeholder engagement are at the core of this process. These reflect the fact that DSEP does not make these choices on their own, but within the context of the Census Bureau's statistical quality standards, consistent with the best available research and science, and probably most importantly, in a manner that's informed and supported and discussed by the stakeholders like you who provide invaluable feedback to this process. But at the end of the day, this triple trade-off imposes these inescapable constraints and forces agencies like ours to make decisions about our statistical products. So anytime we increase one dimension, it requires a reduction on one or both of the other dimensions. So for example, if we want to increase the granularity of our published statistics, we would either have to reduce the accuracy of the published statistics or weaken the confidentiality guarantee, or some combination of the two. And if we want to improve the accuracy of the statistics that are released, we'd have to reduce the availability of those statistics or reduce the confidentiality protection, or both. And there are many different ways to balance across these dimensions, and you can sort of see that in the graphic of some large, some small across these groups. But whatever your choice is, it has consequences on the resulting statistical product, and your choice always tells you something about the two other items that you might have preferred less. So as we're thinking about these big decisions that we have to make, let's talk more about the principles. So I'm going to turn things over to Luke to kind of quickly walk through the 7 principles and what they mean for our decision making on disclosure avoidance. Thanks.
Thank you, Cass. So with the triple trade-off in mind, what are the characteristics of an ideal applied disclosure avoidance system, or DAS? First, it should support meaningful assessment of the disclosure risk associated with the statistical products you want to release. After all, you can't properly protect something if you can't identify where it's vulnerable. Next, as Cass mentioned, the application of any disclosure avoidance method is going to impact the usability of the statistics being protected. So an ideal DAS should also support meaningful assessment of the impact that system is having on the availability and accuracy of the statistics. Third, since one of our goals is to prevent the re-identification of specific data subjects, and since not all data subjects are equally at risk of re-identification, in each of our published statistics, an ideal DAS will allow us to target disclosure avoidance protections where they're the most needed. Otherwise, ensuring a uniform level of protection sufficient to prevent re-identification might end up overprotecting many records, which could seriously impact the data's usability. Fourth, the statistical products we publish support a wide variety of different use cases, but not all of those cases are necessarily equally important, nor do they necessarily require the same degree of accuracy. Because the triple trade-off, we have to make choices about the proper balance of privacy versus accuracy and availability. The ideal DAS will allow the greater precision in targeting that balance to a greater ability to target that balance to ensure sufficient accuracy of the resulting statistics for those important use cases. Fifth, because disclosure risk compounds and increases with complex ways in each statistical release, an ideal DAS allows you to track cumulative disclosure risk across multiple releases over time. Sixth, an ideal DAS needs to be transparent. We have an obligation to be transparent about how we collect and process our statistical products, especially when it comes to the issue that can impact the reliability and usability of the statistics. To that end, an ideal applied DAS needs to be explainable to data users, and it should allow the uncertainty that is being introduced to protect confidentiality to be effectively assessed. And lastly, an ideal DAS needs to be feasible. It should come as no surprise that statistical agencies operate with an environment of defined research and production schedules, and often of significant budgetary and human resource constraints. And an ideal DAS will need to be able to effectively and efficiently operate within these limits. So we have identified 7 characteristics of an ideal applied disclosure avoidance system that we can use as yardsticks to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of different candidate disclosure avoidance options. To that end, it is very important to stress that these principles are intended to be a tool for agencies to use in their evaluations, and they're not intended to prescribe the use of one particular DAS over another. In fact, there are often going to be tensions between the principles. For example, the sophistication of an approach that can improve risk assessment and tuning can also make transparency and feasibility more challenging. Similarly, not all these principles are necessarily equally important. For a variety of reasons, an agency may place a higher value on transparency or on targeting protections for vulnerable data subjects because they may consider one feature to be more critical than others, depending on the organizational needs for a given moment. Now, developing these principles wasn't just an academic or a philosophical exercise. As Cass had mentioned, we needed a scientifically principled way to look through the strengths and weaknesses of these very different disclosure avoidance options in order to properly evaluate between them as part of our operational decision making. At this point in the decade, planning for 2030 census is well underway, and we are currently in the phase of research and testing potential changes or improvements for the 2030 census operations. One critical component of these efforts is research supporting the design, improvement, and testing of the disclosure avoidance methods we will use to protect the confidentiality of the 2030 census statistics. Setting up this disclosure avoidance research program, however, required making some initial decisions about how we're going to approach disclosure avoidance for 2030. These initial decisions provide a cornerstone upon which we can define the scope of the research to be performed and gave us the opportunity to put these principles to work. The first question we had to answer was whether disclosure avoidance is necessary for block level total population counts. To put simply, the answer is yes. While these total population counts may not seem especially sensitive on their own, our research leading into the 2020 census demonstrated that releasing block level total population counts without any disclosure avoidance greatly increased the disclosure and re-identification risks associated with the statistics about populations' characteristics and attributes. Introducing even a modest level of uncertainty into these total population counts allows us to better protect the more sensitive characteristics and attributes with substantially less impact on the usability of these statistics. What about total population counts at the state level? Do those pose a similar risk? While the release of any statistics derived from confidential data contributes to a non-zero increase to disclosure risk at the state level, the increased risk is substantially less than the corresponding block level counts. And while there's disclosure avoidance solutions that could be used to ensure accurate apportionment while also protecting the state level total population counts, leveraging these solutions would be difficult to communicate and might impact the overall transparency of the appropriation process. So the increase in transparency that we would gain from publishing the state total population counts without disclosure avoidance protections other than simple aggregation likely outweighs the corresponding disclosure risk, increase in disclosure risk. So, armed with the knowledge that we publish the state counts without disclosure avoidance, but that we need to apply some form of disclosure avoidance protection to the block level total population counts, we decided to use our principles framework to identify which disclosure avoidance methods for protecting the block level total population counts would best align with the principles. So that's where I'll pass things off to Michael to walk us through this assessment.
Michael, unmute, please.
My apologies. Thanks, Luke. I want to stress that we went into this exercise with open minds and we considered 10 different candidate methods from across the full spectrum of available disclosure avoidance options, including cell and table suppression, coarsening techniques like controlled or uncontrolled rounding, and a variety of noise infusion methods like swapping, as was used in 2010, a couple of enhanced swapping approaches, microdata level noise infusion, synthetic data, and formally private noise injection. So how well did each of these 10 methods fare against our 7 principles? Specifically, how well did they align in the context of protecting total population counts at the census block level, and recognizing that this evaluation does require making some assumptions about how these approaches might be operationally designed or implemented? Well, here are the results. The rows here are the 10 different disclosure avoidance methods that we evaluated, and the columns are the 7 disclosure avoidance principles in order. Darker shades here indicate that the method aligned better with that principle. Lighter shades mean that it performed worse. You can see that no disclosure avoidance method performed uniformly well against all of the principles. Each of the methods had their strengths and weaknesses. Suppression methods perform moderately well at targeting protections, principle 3, and are generally highly intuitive to the data user, principle 6. But their necessary impact on smaller populations and on less populous geographies, along with the need to suppress additional statistics to prevent recalculation of suppressed values, make it very difficult to effectively target accuracy for the resulting statistics, principle 4. What about rounding? Well, uncontrolled rounding generally aligns with the principles better than its controlled rounding cousin, and does especially well with principles 2, 6, and 7, assessing the impact on accuracy, transparency, and feasibility. Both types of rounding, however, are generally unable to meaningfully assess disclosure risk, to target protections, or to track risk over time. And the typical uniformity of rounding rules application make targeting accuracy with these methods especially difficult. In the context of the block level total population counts, you'll notice that record swapping as implemented in 2010 aligns perfectly with principles 2, 4, and 6, which deal with accuracy and transparency. This is due to the fact that the 2010 swapping algorithm kept block level population counts invariant, so they were by design published exactly as enumerated. As our recent simulated reconstruction embedded re-identification attack on the 2010 census showed, however, this method is severely limited in its ability to target protections and to track cumulative risk over time. Enhanced versions of swapping that seek to offer higher levels of protection than the 2010 census methods offered, while certainly feasible, Principle 7, don't align terribly well with the remaining principles and are particularly weak in their ability to assess the impact on accuracy and to track cumulative risk over time. Synthetic data is a relatively newer approach to disclosure avoidance that has been showing some incredible promise over the last few years and has the potential to align quite well with each of the principles relating to both protection and accuracy. But synthetic data scored particularly poorly on the feasibility front because it was unclear to the working group if a solution that meets the many and varied needs of our data users could be designed and tested in the available timeframe. Formally private noise injection aligned very well on principles 1, 3, and 5 relating to assessing and tracking risk and for targeting protections, and also aligned very well on targeting accuracy and feasibility, though there was some room for improvement on the assessing impact and transparency fronts. So it's clear that none of these methods align perfectly with all 7 of the principles, but some methods do align better overall than others. So after an extensive and robust discussion, the consensus of the Disclosure Avoidance Futures Working Group was that formally private noise injection would better align with the 7 principles than would do the available alternatives for protecting the block level total population counts for 2030. So based upon the working group's recommendations, the Census Bureau's Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee made 2 preliminary disclosure avoidance decisions for the 2030 census. The first was to approve the use of formally private noise injection for the block level total population counts. The second was to approve the inclusion of a total population count invariant at the state and state equivalent level. State equivalents are, for example, Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. These 2 decisions provided the necessary context for the Disclosure Avoidance Futures Working Group to then develop and scope our broader 2030 census disclosure avoidance research agenda. Before I walk through the components of this research program, however, I want to stress that these preliminary decisions about disclosure avoidance for the 2030 census intentionally defer a number of very important decisions which will be informed by this research program. Most notably, these decisions yet to come include if there will be any total population count invariance or quasi-invariance in between the state and block levels. Also, if there will be any other invariance or quasi-invariance for 2030. What about what the accuracy targets for the block level total population count should be? Which formally private algorithm we should use for the noise injection? And lastly, the range and possible combination of disclosure avoidance and statistical post-processing solutions that we should consider for protecting characteristics and attributes data in the statistics. These important decisions will be made over the coming years and will be informed by the results of this research program. All right, at a high level, our 2030 disclosure avoidance research is divided into 5 parallel areas, focusing on statistical quality and usability, disclosure risk assessment, communication and data user support, support for the Census Bureau's ongoing programs, and demonstration products. So let's look at each of these in a little more detail. And detailed information about each of these areas is available in the 2030 Census Research Project Explorer app by clicking on the blue disclosure avoidance button at the top right. All right, a major focus of our research is on improving our existing disclosure avoidance algorithms and developing new algorithmic approaches including the use of statistical post-processing, to ensure the quality and usability of the 2030 census statistical products. In particular, these efforts are focusing on reducing disclosure avoidance-related error for high-value statistics about small populations. We're also considering releasing additional statistics that were not published as part of the 2020 census products to better meet data users' needs, particularly those for sub-state geographies and for both households' composition and associated characteristics. We're also exploring ways to improve the efficiency of algorithmic tuning to permit greater accuracy without impacting the degree of confidentiality protection. Area 2 focuses on evaluating the evolving disclosure risk of our decennial statistical products, including better assessment of disclosure risk against known empirical and analytical vectors of attack, identification and threat assessment of new and emerging vectors of attack, and specification and evaluation of global and per attribute confidentiality guarantees. Our third research area focuses on providing better information and support to our external stakeholders and data users. This includes developing meaningful explanations and measures of disclosure risk, quantifying and communicating about the disclosure avoidance-related uncertainty of our 2030 census products, and developing and curating tools to help data users incorporate these measures of disclosure avoidance-related uncertainty into their uses of the census statistical products. Decennial statistics also serve as critical inputs for a variety of important Census Bureau programs. Our fourth research area focuses on improving our disclosure avoidance solutions for the decennial statistics that support those programs, including the Population Estimates Program and the Statistical Product First Initiative, among many others. And fifth, to keep stakeholders informed and engaged with this work, we will be regularly reporting out on the status and findings of our research. In particular, we're researching options for developing demonstration statistical products that permit and support external review and assessment of the disclosure avoidance research, that allow external stakeholders to evaluate the impact of potential disclosure avoidance algorithms on the usability of the statistics being protected, and that enable stakeholders to provide critical and actionable feedback to inform decision-making on final system design and implementation. Your engagement with the demonstration statistical products is critical to the process of designing and improving the statistical safeguards for the 2030 census products. So what is our timeline for completing and acting on this research agenda? Well, the research agenda I just walked through is already underway, and the work will continue over the next 2 years. Our plan is that by the conclusion of the 2028 census dress rehearsal, we will have completed all major disclosure avoidance decisions, system design, and prototype development. This will allow us to apply the new system to the 2028 dress rehearsal data and to publish prototype data products for external evaluation. Then, from 2028 through 2033, we will prepare and test the system for full-scale deployment and use, and make any necessary final implementation parameter adjustments based on internal and external evaluations of the dress rehearsal prototype products. So to recap, the Census Bureau wanted a scientifically principled way to approach our decision-making about disclosure avoidance. We developed and socialized a framework of principles to guide us in that regard. As we turned our attention to planning for the 2030 census disclosure avoidance system, we applied that framework and used it to make some initial decisions about how we're going to handle state and block level population counts. Many decisions about the design and implementation of the 2030 DAS are yet to come. A successful 2030 census requires a disclosure avoidance system that can produce the high quality, useful statistics that the nation requires, while also ensuring the confidentiality of the public's individual census responses. We've designed our research program to give DCEP the information needed to ensure the 2030 census DAS achieves this goal. We look forward to sharing the ongoing results of this research with you, and your future engagement with the demonstration statistical products will be a key way to provide critical feedback in this process. Now, I believe we had a number of questions coming in via the Q&A feature, so I'm going to turn things back over to Sally to moderate the questions and discussion. Sally?
Thank you, Michael. And I guess we could quit sharing so we can get you all on the screen for people to see. I'd like to start by saying that it's been my absolute delight and pleasure to lead the team that has been working over the past few years and putting the principles together, as well as now developing the research program, and we will together be executing the research program. I also just wanted to comment that the principles that Luke and Cass and Michael spoke to, as well as the same ones that are included in the Harvard Data Science Review paper. Many of you provided really valuable input on those principles, and that input was incorporated into the final set. But they now have become a set of principles that the Bureau will be using or has already been using to help navigate disclosure avoidance, not just for the 2030 decennial, but across all of our data releases as we move forward, and a set of principles that our Data Stewardship Committee really appreciates, because it helps ground how they're thinking about and how their decision making can be informed with important information from the teams that develop disclosure avoidance methods as we go forward. Okay, so with that, I have answered some of the questions, but not all of them, and I will start throwing some of those out there. One question, and I'll throw this over to you, Michael, is I know what a population count invariant is, but what's an example of a quasi-invariant?
Oh, that's a great question. So an invariant is something that is kind of excluded from the privacy guarantee completely. So in a formally private system, you typically inject noise according to some type of privacy loss budget, where you're essentially tuning how much or how little noise is going to be injected into a statistic by how large or how small a share of your privacy loss budget is assigned to that particular statistic or tabulation. An invariant gets no noise added at all. So there's no privacy loss budget attached to it. It's just published exactly as is, and it's thus excluded entirely from the confidentiality guarantee. A quasi-invariant still operates within the formally private framework, but it essentially works by assigning a very, very large amount of privacy loss budget to a particular tabulation or set of tabulations to make them effectively indistinguishable from the enumerated counts, but still being included within the guarantee. So it would be essentially something where there's still noise being added, but it might be a very, very, very small amount of noise, making the resulting statistic as if it had been held invariant.
Thank you. So the next, there were a couple questions from Jan Vink asking about, will most of the dissemination be in tabular form? And my comment was that we anticipate that most of it will be in a tabular form, and we very much hope to be presenting uncertainties along with the statistics that go into, say, the DHC and other products like DHCA, be similar products that we might produce. And then he's also asked whether the tables will be consistent. And I guess the answer to that, and some of Luke or Cass or Michael, you might want to add to that. Right now, we are anticipating that the tables will be internally consistent, but they may not be consistent across products, depending on what the final methods are that are applied to the disclosure for the disclosure avoidance to the products. Michael, Luke, Cass, anyone want to add to that?
I'll just add that that was also the case in 2020, where we had internal consistency within the redistricting file and the demographic and housing characteristics files, but then there was not consistency across those to the subsequent statistical products that we released, the detailed DHCA, detailed DHCB, and supplemental DHC. So that lack of consistency across products was consistent with what we did in 2020, but no final decisions have been made on that.
And I just would like to point out that we think this is a stretch too far for the stakeholder community, and this was raised in 2020. It was noted in 2020 that first of all, we all know that the statistics that are produced have uncertainty in them. So although we're ensuring consistency within the products, the way things add up, again, this is consistency among measures that are noisy. And we know that if we actually were able to consider not having that strict consistency within products, we could actually be producing things that are potentially much more accurate than what they are now. So this is a stretch too far for 2030, as it was a stretch too far for 2020 to be producing those types of tables. However, who knows what holds in 2040. So moving on, is there already any decision about what methods designing differential privacy, for example, will be reused from 2020 census? And I'll throw that out to anyone who wants to answer that.
I'll take that one. So we're certainly using the methods that were applied for 2020 as an input to our research. And we're actively looking at ways that we can take those algorithms and improve upon them, or look to see if there are alternative algorithms or combinations of algorithmic design and statistical post-processing that can achieve what we achieved in 2020 and then improve on that along the lines of the 5 research areas that I mentioned. So we're certainly building upon what we had in 2020, but also considering alternatives. But at this point, no decisions on which algorithms or algorithmic approaches will or will not be used. That is going to be informed by the output of this research in an ongoing way.
Thank you. Then there's the questions, are there plans to release a technical report behind the selection of formerly private noise injection, what led up to the final results in the table? This could be a useful resource for stakeholders. So I think the question is really asking, will there be a technical report behind the selection that we've made for the initial DCEP decisions? We certainly hope so, time permitting, that we'll be able to be producing such technical documentation. We definitely will be producing technical documentation that underpins any of the data releases that we do, with enough technical detail for stakeholders to really understand what we've done. Any other colleagues, anything else on that one? No? Then we have Hansilo Wang is asking, how will the future decisions about 2030 census disclosure avoidance system by the Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, that's our DCEP committee, be announced to the public? And you're correct, Hansi, it'll be in things like Research Matters, blog posts, webinars, memorandum, presentations, to different stakeholder groups, all of the above that we've used in the past. Luke, Cass, anything to add to that, or Michael? No? Okay, so moving on. What other privacy mechanisms are included in formal privacy beyond differential privacy?
I'll take that one. So formal privacy is a family of methods, like rounding or swapping would be a family of methods. But in the case of formal privacy, it refers to your ability to provide provable guarantees that information is being protected to a certain degree. So there are a variety of ways that you could have those formal guarantees. And in fact, some kind of traditional disclosure avoidance approaches can be implemented in a way that are formally private. For example, certain types of sophisticated cell suppression can be done in a formally provable way, making them kind of theoretically formally private. But in the context of formally private noise injection, the most common that you see are kind of the array of noise injection mechanisms and kind of approaches that are based on the principles of differential privacy. And this includes your kind of standard kind of textbook differential privacy, so epsilon DP. It also includes the different kind of flavors that you see as variations on that, with like epsilon delta DPs, concentrated DP, and so on. So there's a variety of these methods. What they share is that they are all forms of injecting noise into your data, with the amount of noise being tied to however you're kind of formally proving that the data are protected to the desired degree of protection.
Thank you. Okay, so the slide showed that 2010 census swapping process was shown as being comparatively transparent, dark blue. What aspect of 2010 swapping process is transparent, since the degree of swapping hasn't been revealed?
So and actually I'm looking to see how it scored, because So in the context of the 2010 implementation and in the context of what this was explicitly evaluating, which was the block level population counts, because the 2010 block level population counts were held invariant in 2010, they were published exactly as enumerated. We evaluated the 2010 swapping algorithm to be kind of a perfect alignment with the principle of transparency, because you're essentially not doing anything to those counts. They're being published exactly as enumerated. So that would not be the case. And if we were using the same kind of rubric to evaluate 2010 swapping in the context of other kind of attributes and characteristics information, it would not get that full that full dark blue. It would be scoring much more moderately, because even though the idea behind swapping is somewhat intuitive, that method does not allow you to be transparent about the impact on accuracy or utility or reliability. So swapping mechanisms would lose points, so to speak, in the context of the characteristics and attributes statistics. But in the context of the total population count at the block level, it was published as enumerated. So that's perfectly transparent.
Thank you. Luke, I have a question for you. You ready? Okay, to what degree would a DAS method apply to the POP estimate program?
So this is a great question. So I am in the population estimates program, and we just finished up the modified age race census file. If you're not familiar with what that is, it is the 2020 census with noise infused formally. And it has the race categories that we require for the population estimates program. One of the big differences with this file is the way we worked with the science team to have the noise added. We started with the top-down algorithm that was used for the 2020 census normal data products that you've all are familiar with. But then we worked with them to tune it more specifically for our program, because we use a cohort component method, which is very, very sensitive to age detail. And so we wanted really accurate age categories, single year of age. So we worked with the science team to really optimize a little bit, tweak it a little bit more specific to our program. And there's some other enhancements in there, such as we addressed the age heaping that was found in the 2020 census. You can find all this fun information on census.gov, the population estimates program site. But for 2030, we're trying to learn from this process. Obviously releasing 2020 census data in 2025 isn't ideal. So we're taking a preemptive approach, a proactive approach with DA Futures, and already looking forward to trying to take the lessons we've learned with the MARC file and thinking about how can we improve so that we get this data much quicker in 2030, after 2030 census, and get that data again at a high enough quality where we would feel comfortable feeding it into the population estimates program, into the base. It will have to have protections. That's just the nature of using the census data. Confidentiality protections, are going to have to be built in. But we, again, want to make sure that we do it in a way that is specific, as much as possible, to the use case of the estimates program, so that we can keep creating high quality estimates as the years roll by. So.
Thank you, Luke. Cass, I have a collection of questions for you. So you ready? So the first one was that the blog post mentioned that you've designed stakeholder engagement plans. So to elaborate on that, but let me give you a couple more of the questions which speak to the elaboration. Regarding the demonstration products, how many will we have? We don't know yet, I'll say that. But will we be providing metadata and information about those products as we release them? The answer to that is of course. But then with regards to the demonstration, besides demonstration products, so Cass, this is to you as well, will there be other opportunities for stakeholders to weigh in, for example, by commenting on what data is particularly valuable and which data they do not find useful?
Yes, we really want stakeholders to weigh in, and we're also aware that stakeholders have been weighing in for a while and have given a lot of feedback in the 2020. So Shelley, who has a box on the screen, and I have been going through oodles and oodles and oodles of stakeholder feedback, trying to find what are the items that matter and what are critical to different people in different states, which things directly feed into federal law, which things feed into state law, and these sort of ideas. And so one thing I like about your question is what really matters. And I think that gets to the core issue of matters to whom and how much, because we find that everything that is published matters to someone. And we have strong use cases for everything, but really trying to understand what matters the most and where those things are most significant is a critical question for us, and that can only be answered by engaging with stakeholders. As Sally alluded, this is something we've already been thinking and talking about and planning. And the form that will take, we're still fairly open. We have some ideas, and we're also open to engaging people in the way that makes the most sense to them. So as we go down that path, we'll be looking for not only providing opportunities to engage, but providing opportunities to give feedback on how to meaningfully engage. Recently, when talking with some researchers, they said, oh no, we need a very long session because we want to get detailed and talk to you in a very particular way. Whereas other folks might want to have just sort of an open Q&A in a shorter period. So we'll be working on those engagements, and we are committed to that process. It also helps produce better data. So we really want the end result of producing better data. On the other one, so those were the stakeholder engagement, and will there be opportunities? Yes and yes.
Thank you, Cass. Okay, here's a question for you, Michael. Will you have disclosure avoidance plans for the situation in which a citizenship question and the situation in which there is not? So what do you got to say about that?
So good question. The research that we're conducting for the 2030 disclosure avoidance system has to be flexible because, I mean, we're in the research period now, but the content of the 2030 census isn't finalized until much closer to the actual census itself. So there's a variety of things that we're going to have to be able to adapt to, and we don't know what's going to be on the 2030 census. We already know some things that are likely to be changed. We've got the new race categories from Statistical Policy Directive 15, for example, and that's a major change over 2020. But what we are doing with our research plans is just making sure that the algorithmic approaches that we're looking at and evaluating will be able to handle a variety of possible data schema changes in order to make sure that we're benefiting from this research in a way that will give us the flexibility to adapt to whatever it's decided the content of the 2030 census is going to be.
Thank you. So another very good question. The last question was from Connie Citro, and this one is from Connie as well. One of our great stakeholders. Regarding quasi-invariance, I would hope you would also go for invariance if the decision is close, that she Connie supports doing the invariance. And in particular, because quasi-invariance or invariance do not take up privacy budget, that perhaps that would be a good idea. The thing I would say about that, Connie, and Michael might have something to say after my comment, is that it's true that invariants are not taking up privacy loss budget, but what they're taking up is interpretability of the privacy mechanisms and the privacy applied to the data. It causes difficulty in understanding what privacy guarantees we actually have, because we're sort of violating some of the mathematics as soon as we put some of these invariants in there. Michael, is there more to say on that?
Yeah, an invariance could be thought of in two ways. You can think of it as it's an infinite privacy loss budget. So it just essentially blows your privacy loss budget up completely. So in order to still have meaningful interpretability, as Sally was saying, you have to figure out ways to essentially exclude the privacy impact of what's being held invariant from the guarantees that you are making that are governed by your PLB. And the more invariants you consider and kind of the more complex they are, the harder it is to actually have kind of interpretable like guarantees or even interpretable measures for how well you're actually protecting the data. So I understand the argument on both sides. It's an issue of, do you want it to be infinite or do you want it to be constrained? Do you want it to be more interpretable or do you want it to be less interpretable? And yeah, there's arguments in both directions there.
Okay, so again, we have Hansi is asking, how do we expect research for the 2030 disclosure avoidance system to affect efforts to develop a similar system for the American Community Survey? So what I would say there, Hansi, is that all of our research and disclosure avoidance, kind of whether it's for ACS or the 2030 census or even in our econ programs and other statistical products, we're learning every day. The science is changing all the time. And so all of this helps inform decisions and disclosure avoidance systems that we'll make with other products. As does the synthetic data activity that we're doing for creating some of our demonstration products here. That also helps us understand how those techniques can be applied and used in our other products. So all of our science around disclosure avoidance, kind of marches together, if you will, in helping us do the best job that we can to protect confidentiality across the board in our products. So moving on, I realized that I gave a written answer to the wrong question. One question that was asked was, when will decisions be made regarding holding invariant geographies such as counties? That would be valuable for redistricting in local jurisdictions. We agree with that, but the best I can say, a decision will be made before the 28 test. All research will be completed before the 28 test. So depending on where we are and what decisions DCEP has made at that time, how much before that time, I don't know. My answer to that question got attached to the question that I am now going to toss over to Michael. Has there been research into the utility of bottom-up approaches?
Yes, and research is ongoing. So for those who are unaware, the 2020 census used an algorithmic approach called top-down, where we were applying protections at the nation level, then the state level, then the county level, and working our way down to the individual census blocks, so that essentially lower geographic levels were inheriting accuracy, if you will, from their higher levels, and also so that the individual census blocks, which had to be noisy in order to protect confidentiality because that's where the risks were greatest, those individual noisy blocks could be aggregated together and in larger and larger geographies. And as you added blocks together to form those larger geographies of interest, a lot of that noise canceled itself out. So you got more and more accurate statistics as you moved up your way up the geographic hierarchy. So that was the rationale for top-down in 2020. In that context, there were some evaluations of kind of relatively simple bottom-up approaches, and we found that top-down greatly outperformed those bottom-up approaches in terms of accuracy and reliability of the data. We are, however, as part of our 2030 research, looking at ways of kind of enhancing the algorithmic processing to incorporate kind of a bottom-up approach into how algorithms inspired by the top-down nature of the 2020 census actually process. And these are called kind of full information models, where you're using lower level noisy measurements to inform kind of your processing and protection of the data at the higher levels as well. So no decisions have been made. This is something that's certainly a very interesting approach that could be very beneficial, but it's premature to say whether that or an alternative is going to be included.
And we have one last question to round out our session here. And the question is, a lot of the federal data that has been held by other federal agencies is now being shared across federal agencies, particularly with Homeland Security for immigration enforcement. And that seems likely to reduce trust in whether census data will be shared, even if the Bureau has not and will not share its data with other agencies? Does this affect your choice of privacy protocols, and if so, how? No, it does not affect our choice of privacy protocols. What impacts us in terms of privacy protocols and how we approach confidentiality is what's enshrined in Title 13 and the guidance that we get from our Data Stewardship Committee. And so we will continue to operate under that model. So I don't know if anyone has anything they want to add to that, or my three colleagues, any final comments that you'd like to make?
I'll just make a quick response to Claire left a question in there about the 7 principles and if we should add an additional one about communication, because it's so difficult to communicate about the DAS approach. And want to acknowledge that that is true. And like the prior question, so many of these answers center on trust, as does collecting the data and providing the data back and using the data. A lot of what this all comes on is trust, and it's really critical to trust the data and trust the process. And so I agree with Claire, and I have a recommendation, which is, Claire, you did an excellent first book. Really loved it. I think you should do a second book on this topic, and we will use it as we go out and talk with people. But also, this is an issue. It's something that we're addressing and we're thinking about. And I think, all joking aside, crowdsourcing of figuring out how do we get this into classrooms, how do we get this at universities, how do we get this into data centers, how do we get the information out about why this is valuable, why it supports more trust, and how it is used and the mechanisms behind it. It's something we really do care about, but this will be larger than any agency can do on their own. So I welcome you all to engage with us on that process, in that process.
I will add to what I absolutely agree with everything that Cass just said. I will add to Claire's points. We weren't able to dive too deeply into the principles today, but that idea of communication and being explainability of what you're doing is kind of part of Principle 6 about transparency. It's not just transparency about what the impact on the data are, like we talked about before. It's also transparency about how well you're protecting the data, transparency about how you're processing it, transparency about your methods. It encompasses a lot. So I would suggest looking at the paper. You'll see a much fuller discussion of kind of what's baked into that principle and how it encompasses a lot of different elements of that communications challenge.
So we have one late breaking question that came in that I did provide an answer to, but I thought that I would, if James, if you're willing to answer a question about integrating voting districts into the spine and why we don't do that.
Thanks, Sally. Sure, I'd be happy to address that. So the voting districts are, we call them sort of ephemeral. We don't collect those until much later in the decennial cycle, and then we remove them from the geography after the decennial. So we don't have them available currently to use on the spine, but I know that we are looking at a lot of other geographies and geographic pieces for things like the primitives that we use for the pop estimates and some other things like that, that all should lend strength to the accuracy of the voting districts when the time comes to actually create the data.
Thank you. And let me thank my colleagues and thank you, the audience, for all of your great questions and the attention that you've given us. And again, you'll be able to watch this again to your heart's content in a few days after it gets released on our website. So have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
That concludes today's webinar. You may disconnect at this time.